Hi, I'm Sally Glass and welcome to episode 175 of Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit Fort Worth Contemporary Arts and speak with Matthew Collings, one half of the collaborative team Biggs and Collings, about the exhibition Suspicious Utopias. Now for Art This Week.
When me and Emma Biggs start painting, fussiness is basically what we're doing. Yeah. We're getting down one color and then another color near it, and then another color and another color far away, and we're gradually building up to that one, then coming back and changing that one. And basically we're just sort of fussing until there's a believable unity to all those differences.
Oh, that's awesome. How do you guys discover what colors? How does that decision process happen?
There's a very strict division of labor. All the color comes from Emma. All the color ideas. She thinks up a color and she thinks where it will go. And she never paints, and I never think up the colors or think where they will go. I always paint. And it's because really the final product is very, very complex and intricate, and it would be chaotic if we were both painting or both thinking up the colors. But it's also because she's got an experience and a sensibility and a mindset geared to color far more than mine, and I've got a set of faculties geared more to painting that is relatively crude about color. So we accept the difference between us and we allocate each other the jobs that are going to make the overall job be most efficiently done.
Well, that's awesome. It's like a perfect pairing. When did you guys sort of discover that perfect pairing?
About 15 years ago. We got together as partners about 16 years ago, and within roughly a year we started realizing that if we collaborated, because Emma's a mosaicist, and she'd been doing mosaics for years before then. She continued to do them, and I'm a writer and an art critic, and I write art books and I make films about art, but I've always painted as well. And when we met, I realized that there was something in what she did with the colors in her mosaics that my paintings were missing and needed. And so I started asking her advice. And as I say, this was about 15 years ago. She would advise me, and then I realized that her advice was so effective that actually it was the heart of the painting, and so that we could try doing it together. We would make ourselves equal in a kind of double act of painting, which is an odd thing, that there are double acts and groups who produce contemporary art, but not very much painting, and certainly not painting which is very, very visual and very intensely visual.
You mentioned that you're a writer, a critic, and a filmographer. It's how often do all those worlds cross together?
Well, they don't really. In the sort of world of commentary, where I'm commenting on other people's work, analyzing other people's work, processing other people's work, and trying to make it make sense for an audience, I would say it only involves my own interest as a painter negatively, in that my comments might tend to be critical because I'm not seeing something that I'm personally interested in, which is visual painting or visual art, really. So I'm not so personally interested in conceptual art, and most art now is pretty conceptual. So I have to leave my own interest behind. I have to accept that it's not something that I would make myself. And I just have to draw on my knowledge of that kind of thing in a rather distant way. And that's probably why my commentary tends to be humorous and skeptical and a bit ironic and a bit playful, and sometimes maybe a little bit offensive to the artist, because it isn't really my scene, even though decade after decade after decade reluctantly has become my scene, because I'm used to commenting on that stuff.
It's just sort of you see it every day and all that.
Yeah, I see it every day, and it's a knowledge system which now is, makes me up. It's how my brain ticks. And in fact, I drew on that knowledge system when I made the decision to collaborate with Emma. It's just that our works are really different to that knowledge system. There's a conceptual element to what we do, but the final result is not conceptual art. It's very, very visual. And I've said that a couple of times, and I have to keep emphasizing it, that we are doing visual art that doesn't need any commentary, But if you want one, I can definitely provide one.
So you've got a combination of what seems to be computerized imagery and then hand painting. How often do you sort of cross those worlds?
Never. This is an experiment. Oh. In fact, the whole show is divided into 3 different types of things. A manifesto, because that's what artists have got to do. There's a wall text, a giant wall text, which is our manifesto. An experiment, because good artists should experiment, and that's this. And our basic work. That's there's one painting here, but when the show opens, there'll be 2 paintings. So our basic work is oil paintings, colored abstract oil paintings. So this is an experiment where we're looking at the issues that we deal with in our paintings, but we're looking at them in a slightly different way than we normally do. So we reduce the color right down. There is color there, but it's a very, very reduced color. We're interested in, our work has very much to do with different qualities of surface. So we've exaggerated the difference of surface in that, as you observe, some of them are digitally generated prints, and some of them are paintings done on paper, and we're putting them together. And then we've taken the quality of very bounded shapes that we have in our paintings, and we made that a bit more complex. Instead of just triangles, there's also circles as well as triangles. And there's stretched out triangles and sort of square triangles, or squares that are tipped on the side to become triangles, or diamonds.
How often do you usually take up like the expanse of a whole gallery for your
Never.
manifesto? So has this been sort of like a fun thing to
Yeah,
play with?
the whole thing is much more discursive than we usually do. We usually would have a catalogue, which could well be playful with images and text. And we might quote Karl Marx, or we'd show images from art history. We would have a few sort of pithy comments about what art is. We might show some photos of nature, or photos of the sides of buildings. We'd say all this goes into our work, but that would be a catalogue. And then our exhibition would be an intense load of our paintings, so you're kind of overwhelmed by colour and light. And here it's almost the other way around. So the great area of this very large space is taken up with words, and a much smaller area shows our paintings. And it's just an experiment, but it's also the fact that there's a university attached to this gallery, and we want it to be a sort of didactic experience as much as it is an aesthetic experience.
I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but like you walk in and you see all the text and stuff, you can't help but just like stop and just like sort of be taken in by it, which is really cool.
Thank you. Well, the text is also a coloured text, so it has a visual element. It's divided up into different colours. So one thing we like in art history is Christian cathedrals that are decorated. Every square inch of the surface is decorated somehow, and Islamic mosques, which are also decorated. But an Islamic mosque is all patterns, whereas the frescoes and mosaics in the cathedral in the medieval ages is patterns plus imagery, symbolic images. But we like that wall-to-wall overwhelming visual effect. So for all that we're expanding our act in this show, we've tried to keep a colour flicker pulsing throughout the gallery.
Yeah.
So you could choose to get involved in that text very closely and try and understand what it's saying. Yeah. Or you could just see it as something visual. There's elements from our paintings, those coloured triangles. There's different colours, beautiful greys and off colours flickering through the whole thing. We're even thinking that the lines of type are a formal element as well. So you don't really have to be intimidated by the intellectual ideas of this text, but if you want to get involved with them, it is a pretty interesting read. Some guy years and years ago published an article that criticised me. It's been on his website for 12 years, and I thought it's fair enough, he has a right to criticise me. But I thought for this show, why don't we take that article and interrupt it all the way through with our own ideas, me and Emma's ideas about what our paintings are about. So we're going to address his article, say where he's wrong, and where he's maybe sometimes right, but then take the whole thing as a sort of platform for our own manifesto, where we present an artist's manifesto of what are the ideas that make our paintings tick. And so that's what we've done. And then when we've done all that, we then redacted his text, so you can't read it. But if you want to read it, you can strain hard. We think that's a sort of a metaphor for what goes on with art writing anyway, that it's impossible to read usually. You have to strain very hard.
Yeah,
So you can actually make up, it's pretty clear that if you adjust to your eyes a bit, according to the press release, it is the first show Matthew has curated for an institution, and he seems to have enjoyed it. So you can actually read it. But I think the use of reading it is that you can see the argument that I'm dealing with. But if you don't want to bother reading it, then the argument that we're mounting ourselves is interesting enough.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how you guys use that. You use the whole space, you use the wall with the text and the colors and stuff to really go with the patterning and the mosaics that you guys do. Move in front of
Well, when the two paintings are up, there's only one up now.
Yeah.
But when the two paintings are up, you'll see that all of the surfaces are pulsing in quite an even way. Although there's a lot of differences, they even out. There's a sort of decorative flicker or a sort of sense of something glittering and visually delightful and surprising, and that element of repetition and variation that the paintings are based on is going to activate all the walls of this space.
Yeah.
So that the space is a little bit like those religious buildings of the very distant past, where you come in and you expect your mind to be somehow filled with some kind of cosmic meaning. We're filling it with the meanings of art rather than the meanings of religion. But this is really this painting and another painting that's being stretched at the moment, it's going to be brought in. This is really the heart of what we do. It's a sort of very complex, decorative art, which at the same time as being visually pleasing has a sort of intellectual element. You're not just the passive receiver of this painting, you're kind of engaging in making the rhythms yourself. It sets up a lot of configurations, but they're multiplying and syncopating like rhythms in music. And you pick out, when you're looking at it, you're sort of picking out configurations, say the configurations made by all the orange elements, or configurations made by all these browny grey elements. And you're noticing the different register between the high sharp colours and the much more muted grey colours, or noticing the tonality, so that each colour is presented in a version of light and dark. And then noticing also that the greys, or the muted colours, are actually iterations or different versions of the high colours. So they're not just neutral greys, they're very active, dynamic ones. So this thing is buzzing around and making itself, and you as the viewer are receiving a kind of pleasure from the painting, but you're also receiving a sort of message about how pleasure is made, why it is that we take pleasure in abstract structures, and why human beings seek out a structured environment.
Yeah. So about how long does it take you both to complete a painting of this size?
That took about 9 months.
Okay.
But sometimes they take about 3 months. So we couldn't do that in less than 3 months. But we have quite a few on the go at once. Each one we get ideas from one that feeds into another. But it's a laborious process because there's no chart or anything to begin with that we then fill out. We're doing them bit by bit, like any painter would paint a picture. Like Turner might paint a landscape. He dab something there and something there and something there. So Emma will think up a colour, say, to go there, and then she'll say, try it in a few other places as well. Then she'll see what it looks like. How have I handled it? How's it got on? You'll see all these textures are very, very different, and each time the paint is manipulated in the way that I put it on, it creates its own colour effect. So then she has to respond to that and think, well, what might the next colour be? What will make the whole unity shimmer and work and have a rich complexity and make it worth looking at? And she has to do that bit by bit by bit by bit, thousands and thousands of times. There's something like 1,600 different sections, each of which has been thought and painted, and very many of them have been changed and revised.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you ever had to go back and change.
We go back
color.
all the time. A lot of this paint is quite thick and grungy. A lot of it is thin and scratchy, and the white primer is coming through, but a lot of it is actually surprisingly thick, considering that when you look at it, you see it all together like that, it all seems to be the same. But something like that bit, for example, is very, very thin paint. And then some of these backgrounds, the paint is really built up, so that if all the painting was done like that, it would be rather sort of gnarly and grungy.
I also love how, like, you know, the paint just rests against all the different colors, how they just rest against each other.
Yeah, I mean, the effect is of
Yeah.
a very compartmentalized, bounded shapes. Actually, when you come in, you see that it's quite scruffily done. You know, we're not a sort of, we don't fetishize those divisions. And it's not about, oh, how sharp can you get a line? The line is as sharp as the painting needs it to be. So it's a lot of sort of slight rough unevennesses balanced out in such a way that there's an impression of precision from a distance.
Yeah. Do you use tape at all?
We use everything, yeah. We use, a lot of it is wet into wet, so tape isn't going to work. So if we start off with a shape like that and there's a lot of white canvas, it's relatively easy just to tape the shape. Then when I'm going from the light application to the dark, I lay the piece of paper over the side of my, we have thousands of books in our house, and a lot of them are rubbish, so we cut them up. And typically I use edges of pages from books. So scrub on the paint a bit thin, and then I lay down the edge of a page, and I scrub on the paint a bit thicker, take away the page, and one side looks light and one side looks dark. And then sometimes when the paint is built up, and because it's oil paint, it hasn't dried very quickly, I have to work in a very fiddly way to get in a whole shape where everything is wet, but still get those sharp edges. And that can take, 3/4 of an hour just to do one little shape. Whereas if things are dry around it, it might take 7 minutes or something. I mean, that's why it takes a long time. I'm good at those things, like working with my hands. I've been painting all my life, really. But we've given ourselves something that no matter how good you are with those processes, is actually quite hard to do. It's very fiddly, and it involves a lot of mistakes and revisions, and until you get it right.
Yeah. So it challenges you each time and keeps.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a challenge for its own sake, but it is challenging. But those revisions are what make the painting. I think any traditional painter would say the same thing, that it's when you go back and you fiddle with things that the overall unity has some impact. If everything comes out too smoothly and easily, there's something bland about the painting. The question of how we title them is quite a good one, because all the titles come from the book of Genesis. And the reason is we're against contemporary art's obsession with the new. We think we're contemporary artists and we want to express the present moment that we live in. But we don't want to do it only by thinking about the present. And so we're interested in anything that suggests the past. And as Genesis is about origins, that's become our source for titles. And they're interchangeable, the titles, they don't really mean anything. They just give a clue to our concerns. But we try and find titles that have some kind of connection to what we're doing. So this one is called The Greater Light. So it's a couple of words from Genesis. There's the lesser light and the greater light. I don't know what chapter it comes from. And the painting has a certain light that comes out from it. The other painting that's arriving this afternoon that's going to be in the show is called 807 Years. Now, as you know, Genesis is full of people's incredibly long ages. All the prophets lived to 900 years or 800 years. And all that we're trying to draw attention to there is that the paintings have very, very many elements. So 807 Years is a nice sort of meaningless title, but it suggests numerical greatness. We've had paintings called Inhabitants of the Cities, so we think the painters are quite urban, or The Philistines' Land, because we're against Philistinism. A shining sword, because the paintings seem to shine. But in any case, they all come from Genesis. That's the basic answer.
We want to thank Matthew for speaking with us. More information on the team can be found at emmabiggsandmatthewcollings.net. More information on the exhibition in the gallery can be found at theartgalleries.tcu.edu. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.